So last month was National Poetry Month, and at my older daughter's school, they celebrated it. They had various activities. They learned about poetry in class. They read poems. They listened to poems. They had the principal read poems over the PA system in the mornings, and they voted on poems. They, as individual classes, and then the school as a whole, they listened to different poems over the course of the month, and then at the end of the month, they voted on their favorites. And I thought this was a pretty good idea. Needless to say, the poems they read and listened to and voted on were terrible. The winner was a poem about blowing a bubble gum bubble that was really big, and then at the end of the poem it popped. But they loved it, and that's what made me happy about it, is they were voting on things they actually liked, and they had arguments about it. My daughter's favorite poem was not the winner overall, and that is to say, she had a favorite poem. Like different kids had different favorite of the various PA system poems. She liked one of them so much that she memorized it, and she changed some of the lines around and made her own version of it. Thinking back on, I studied poetry a fair amount in elementary school as these things go. I don't think it ever seemed possible that there would be a favorite poem, that I would have a favorite poem, at least not as something I encountered in school. I liked some things I read outside of school, but a lot of the books I liked reading most outside of school, I got in trouble for bringing to school. So, the idea that there was that you would be spending time in school listening to poems and then picking your favorite one just because you liked it, just because it sounded good, or you thought it was funny, or it was about something you were interested in, or even your friends liked it. Even it just got a rise out of the class as a whole. Even just it had some popular effect. That idea was pretty alien to me in elementary school. And so I was glad. I have been pretty convinced by the argument Dana Gioia set forth in that essay on enchantment that I talked about with Mark McGinnis, that the new critics, for all of their virtues and for all their impressive legacy, they did maybe more harm than good in schools. And we would probably do well as a society not to take poetry out of schools altogether, but maybe to take teaching poetry out of schools. Maybe just to let poetry in schools be something fun. Be the honey around the rim of the glass. Sydney compares it to the milk that babies drink before they're able to digest solid food. It prepares them for taking in hardier, more fibrous material. And the other element that I think that Gioia recommended that was present in my daughter's Poetry Month activities was competition. That some of the poems were better than others. Some of the poems beat each other out. And that means you had to say, why they beat each other out. They beat each other out in that case because more kids liked them. That alone is the idea that poems could beat one another out because more people liked them is an idea that is pretty much absent from what you might call page poetry. It's present online. It's present in Insta poetry. It's present in spoken word poetry. It's present in the elements of poetry that remain in pop music, rap, and so on. But it's pretty absent from page poetry, right? The popularity of a poem by virtue of sheer enjoyment of groups of people as a whole. That's just an idea you don't encounter in academic poetry, in literary poetry, in page poetry, but it was very present in my daughter's school over this past April, for which I was grateful. Now, on the last day of the month, driving her home from school, I asked her about which poem won. She told me about the stupid fucking bubble poem. And then I asked her, I said, so you spent some time in school talking about poems, and you read some poems, and you learned, they did have, their librarian taught them some things. I think they have an English language arts teacher, then their homeroom teacher, and all of them talked about poems in some ways or dealt with poems in some ways. So I just asked her, I said, did you talk about what poems are? And she said, yes. And I said, okay, what's a poem? And she paused for a good while, and then she gave me a short, simple, declarative sentence in answer. And I felt it, like I felt the shadow of it cross my brain moments before she spoke. I anticipated the sentence verbatim. And I bet you can too. When I asked, what is a poem? She said, it doesn't have to rhyme. And then, and then a few moments after that, she said, there aren't any rules. What is a poem? It doesn't have to rhyme. And it just got me thinking, like, is there anything else we teach kids in school? Is there any other subject, any other topic, any other definition we teach kids in school? The first element of which, is there anything else? The first fact about which you learn is one of the things that it doesn't have to include. What is a painting? Well, it doesn't have to have red in it. Step one to understanding what a painting is. What is a triangle? Well, on a non-Euclidean surface, the angles don't have to sum to 180. That's what a triangle is, right? What is a planet? Well, the majority of the surface doesn't have to be covered by briny, life-supporting bodies of water. It seems sort of insane that this is not only that this is the first sentence that came to her mind, but that I knew it was the first sentence that would come to her mind, and that you could probably have guessed that too, that pretty universally, what is a poem? What is poetry? The very first thing that comes to mind is, well, one of those elements of poetry that we most intuitively associate with the art form, the thing that almost all of us enjoy and recognize and associate with it most strongly and most intuitively, that thing doesn't have to be there, and that's the first thing you need to know about it. And if there is a second thing, that second thing is just sort of an elaboration on that principle, which is that there are no rules. I finally did, though, I changed the form of my question a little bit. I said, all right, so your teacher says a lot of things to you in class. She has conversations with you that are personal. She gives you instruction for your various assignments. She tells you facts about the subjects you're learning about. She maybe makes jokes sometimes. She reads aloud from books at times. Sometimes maybe she recites something from memory. And I said, so your teacher says a lot of things to you. Some of those things are poems, and some of them are not. Right? And my daughter said, right. And by the way, I should say, I don't blame. I think what is a poem? It doesn't have to rhyme is a terrible foundation for understanding poetry or thinking about poetry or just for liking poetry. I think it's a pretty useless introduction to the art form. But I don't blame her teachers. Right? Her teachers work really fucking hard, and they didn't invent this shit. Right? There's a reason I knew what she was going to say before she said it. This is not her teacher's fault. I certainly don't blame them. They have plenty on their plates. But But I said, when your teacher talks, sometimes what she says is a poem and sometimes it's not. And she said, okay, yes. And I said, okay, so how do you know the difference? How do you know when what you're hearing is a poem? Sometimes it's a poem, sometimes it's not. When it is, how do you know? And my daughter's answer, I think, was actually the beginning of a reasonable, meaningful definition. I said, how do you know what your teacher is saying is a poem? And my daughter said, I know because of the way she says it. The way she says it, not what she's saying. It doesn't really matter what it's about. It doesn't really matter what she's saying. It matters how she's saying it. And that is pretty true, I think. I think that's actually like the first step in a pretty good definition of what poetry is. Now, we didn't get a lot further than that, but, she's in fucking second grade, and it's a short drive. So I don't blame her teachers, and I think they do wonderful things. And one of the wonderful things they do is just get the kids to enjoy. Here's some poems that are just fun to listen to. Just some good old, dumb, sugary Jack Prelutsky style, silly kid poems. That shit's great. That's great. But there is at least somewhere in there the beginning of a thought about what poetry might actually be. And I don't think that's necessarily something that the kid should ever have to resolve in school. But it is something I'm going to keep thinking about. How do you know what you're hearing as a poem? Because of the way she says it. There's a way poems sound that is different from the way things that are not poems sound. Then the only question really remaining is, what is that way? And we ran out of drive home and 8-year-old attention span and the month of April before we got to the answer. So I guess we'll just have to wait till National Poetry Month 2023. I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to Slee Rickets. Thank you all for listening. Holy shit, I'm nervous as fuck to do this. So, good news, bad news, everybody. The bad news is Slee Rickets is selling out. The good news is it's selling out to you. So this has been in the works for a little while now. I am launching a Slee Rickets secret show. There is this feed, the main show, Slee Rickets as you've known it for a little over a year now. That is going to stay the same. That is going to be, nothing's changing there. The feed's going to be the same. If you're subscribed, you stay subscribed. Nothing is going to change there. I'm still going to be doing a dumb show every week. There's a little rain and thunder in the background you may hear to add some ambiance to this ominous announcement. The show as you know it is going to be unchanged. There is also going to be a secret show, which is only sort of a secret. I didn't know what else to call it, so that's what I'm calling it. But that is a show that you can sign up to listen to on Substack. So if you go to sleerickets.substack.com, you can sign up. It is extremely easy and intuitive, and there will be a new podcast feed in your iPhone or your whatever phone. However you listen to it, it will give you a new feed to listen to a new secret show. Now, there are two main goals to this enterprise. One is to break even, right? There are, not like terrible costs, but like there's definitely some costs associated with recording equipment, with hosting the RSS feed, with which I just do through my website that I pay for it with some Zoom things when I try, for doing conversations with more than two people, which I'm hoping to do more of in the future, mostly with buying a lot of fucking books and subscriptions for other things to read and sometimes watch and talk about. So there, as I said, there are some costs, nothing terrible, but I would just love to break even. That's really my aim. So there is this secret show is for money. The main feed is always going to be free. It's going to stay the same, but this new one will be a greedy capitalist venture. I went with Substack instead of the major podcast monetizing competitor, purely because Substack has a better record on free speech. It has nothing to do with the fact that it's less confusing to me. It's easier of the shows I subscribe to, the ones on Substack are easier to sign up for, I find. It has nothing to do with all that. It's purely a matter of principle. This is high-minded. Sleeve Ricketts is an ethical organization, and now I know for sure that I definitely will never be associated with any corporation that ever does anything wrong. So that's that. Again, you go to sleeverickets.substack.com, you put in your email address, and then you pick an option. So here are the options. I set the monthly fee. I've been waiting to do this for a while. I've been figuring out how to do it. I've been going back and forth. And one of the main factors slowing me down was this. How often am I going to put out a new show? And the answer is I don't know exactly right now. So I held off launching for a little while because I just didn't know exactly how often I'd be able to do that. I do tend to be, a number of episodes ahead. I tend to have a lot of extra material. And so it's fun to put together these other episodes. But this sort of gets me to my second major reason for doing this. The first is breaking even. The second is, as at a poetry reading recently, Jonathan Farmer stood up in the audience and said, "Now that you're apparently committed to torching your career, is there anything you feel more at liberty to say?" And, I guess the answer is sort of the entire podcast. But I guess maybe I'm a little more cowardly than Jonathan gives me credit for, and a little more considerate of my wife, who frequently says, "Don't talk about that on the show." So part of what the secret show will allow is for me to be even more careless about what I say, for me to include conversations with Brian or with Alice or with some guests, or just dumb solo monologues about things I probably shouldn't talk about in public. And so I won't talk about them in public. I will only talk about them with you. The tiny barrier, I think the rule with internet content is sort of like the rule with 19th century warfare, which is that even a little wall can make all the difference in the world. So I set the monthly subscriber fee to the minimum that you could on Substack, but that minimum is $5 a month. And given that I'm not sure exactly how often I'll be able to put things out, that seems too high, right? If I were able to put things out really regularly, then that might make sense. But I think it's probably a little bit too high right now because I just don't know yet. So for now, what I've done, I can't set that any lower because that's what the lowest Substack will allow. But I went around their system a little bit and I set the annual fee to that minimum. And so if you sign up for a monthly fee, it's $5 a month. If you sign up for an annual fee, it's literally half that. So you pay all at once, but it's half that. It's $250 a month. And that seems closer. Like if you have a little goodwill toward the show and you'd like to see it thrive, and you maybe would also like to listen to some new, interesting, even more ill-advised conversations and monologues, then that's where you go. You go $250 a month for the annual fee. sleeverickets.substack.com. I will obviously have a link in the show notes. If money is a problem for you, please do write to me. sleeverykids@gmail.com, and we'll figure something out. If you're a diehard, maybe I'll give you like a trivia question and a code or something. We'll work something out. Oh, and then there is another option. If you are rich, right? I know a lot of poor people listen to this, poor artists listen to this. Great. Please continue to listen. Please let me know if money is a real problem for you. And I can work something out with you. But if you are a rich person, I know at least a few rich people listen to this. If you're rich, there's a special subscription option just for you. I know rich people like exclusive options. There's a special option just for you. Motherfucker of the Arts, you get everything that a regular subscription will get you, but you get to pay more. And I don't know, maybe you can twist my arm. Maybe we can find some other find some other special benefit just for you. But if sign up to be a Motherfucker of the Arts if you're rich, you richies out there, that's the option for you. I'm trying to think of what else is on there. So I've put at the end of a couple of recent episodes, I put a short preview of what's on there in the first 2 episodes. So I'm sorry, that was a big thing I forgot to say. There are 3 episodes on there already. There are 3 completely new secret show episodes live on there right now. I've also put on there the episode 55 that I pulled from the main feed. That's on there in its original form. It's all there. And I'm hoping like there are some very shy people I've talked to about coming on the show. My hope is maybe if some of them are too shy to come on the main feed, they'll come on the private feed. Most of what's on there right now are sort of, I don't do a lot of intro talk on there because I figure why you might as well just get to the meat. What's on there right now is mostly dumb monologues by me, followed by dumb conversations with Brian. But it should be, I think it's going to be fun stuff. I think like we can be a little less careful, a little less buttoned up if we've been buttoned up at all thus far. And I think you're really going to like it, is my guess. That's my hope. I don't want this to be an act of charity. I want this to be something that's just fucking fun. That's my rule for any show I subscribe to for money is it's got to be one I just am eager to listen to. I just enjoy listening to. That's it. Same rule applies as with poetry. So if you're just feeling charitable, I accept that reasoning too. please do sign up. So there are 3 episodes already up there, as well as the pulled episode 55. That's up there too. I labeled it locked, which might have been slightly confusing. All that means is it's on the private feed now, but it is there in its original form. You can listen to it today. Sign up today, and you can all listen to all 4 of those. And there will be more to come. I don't know exactly how much, but here's my principle. When I figure out exactly how much I'm going to be able to update it, I might raise the annual rate above $250 a month. So if you are, if you're a diehard, sign up now. And you probably will be paying less than somebody who signs up 6 months from now. I don't know. We'll see. But again, if you have any questions, please write to me. Again, Substack is super easy to use. I find it's much easier to use than the big competitor. So again, that's a total coincidence. I'm purely choosing them based on principle, free speech, etc. To give you a little taste of the kind of stuff that's on there, Brian and I listen to and make fun of Ethan Hawke's hilariously dumb TED Talk on poetry. I have a tipsy apology to a very important poetry critic. Brian roasts a MacArthur genius at length. We talk about a very clumsy attempt to cancel me, and a bunch of other stuff. I think you're going to like it. That's my goal. I just want to make shit you're going to like, that I enjoy doing, that's fun for everybody. And then again, no narcs allowed. Okay, I had a great segment all planned and recorded and edited and ready to go for today's episode. But then the news took a little bit of a left turn, or really rather, I looked up from my poetry hole and noticed that the news had already taken a pretty hard left turn. And just by bad coincidence, the segment I'd recorded, it just felt a little bit tonally shaky, a little bit like kind of like when Donnie Darko was going to come out, and then Columbine happened, and they had to postpone it. It's just a little close for comfort. So I am gonna hang on to it because I think it's a good segment, but I'm gonna release it maybe in a couple weeks or so. But I have something else for you today. So though I've been completely out of touch when it comes to news of the world at large, I have been somewhat tuned into poetry news, and I've noticed something striking in the last few weeks. I have read probably a dozen different articles on Ada Limon. I don't know how to say her name, so I'm going to just say Ada Limon. If it's different than that, I apologize, but you probably don't expect any different from me at this point. So Ada Limon has a new book out. It's called The Hurting Kind. This is book umpteen for her. This and the previous two have been kind of big hits. The Carrying and then Bright Dead things. She won, I think, the National Book Critics Circle Award. Here is a brief excerpt from Sarah Franklin's piece in LitHub. All of these, by the way, are from the last 2 weeks. So just a ton of coverage. Two different pieces in LitHub, 3 different articles in the New York Times. So this is from Sarah Franklin's piece. Though Limon inspires, she's far from an inspirational poet. Bookmark that thought. Critics have heralded Limon's work for its playfulness in form, its sumptuous, accessible language, and the proximity into which she pulls her readers with familiar language and granular attention to detail. Tracy K. Smith called Limon a poet of ecstatic revelation, her poems fast and full of detail, and her voice conversational. The Carrying won the National Book Critics Circle Award that same year. The New Yorker published Envelopes of Air, a series of thrummingly feminine and searingly intimate epistolary poems made in a collaboration between Limon and Natalie Diaz. The project was made over the course of 9 months in 2017, an apt gestation period given the explorations of womanhood coursing through the poem. So Craig Morgan Teicher reviewed The Hurting Kind, gave it a pretty strong positive review. It was reviewed in the Boston Globe. In the Atlantic actually had a longer piece. NPR reviewed it rapturously. The book shows up in LitHub's list of best reviewed books, which mostly is fiction and nonfiction, by the way. But it was got raves in the Brooklyn Rail, the Poetry Foundation, the San Francisco Chronicle, Shelf Awareness, Plowshares, the Los Angeles Times, Book List. So I noticed this. Lots of coverage, lots of attention. I know she's been a kind of a darling of the poetry world for a few years now. But I thought there was something a little bit different about this coverage. So, poets gain popularity or renown for a variety of reasons. There are, 3 that come to mind that are, well, I should say, okay. So 3 bad reasons that poets gain renown are the persona or the personal narrative of the poet is appealing to readers or more often to critics. I think Ocean Vuong is probably a good example of that. There's also what William Goldman called the snob hit effect, which is to say that 1 or 2 extremely discriminating and prominent minds approve of something enthusiastically, and people as a result of that respond by saying, "Oh, if I want to be smart, I guess this is something I should like too." I think Ben Lerner is probably a good example of that. At least with the poetry. Again, I haven't really read his prose. Another reason, which is not a terrible reason, it's probably the best of the bad reasons, is pure, I was going to say sociopathic, not necessarily sociopathic, pure, uncut, unrelenting hustle. And I think Kaveh Akbar is, I think his poems are not so great, but there may not be anybody working as hard as Kaveh Akbar. I don't think he's working at making his poems better, but he is working at advancing his career. And, the man has stamina for this kind of stuff. So I think those are all 3 kind of familiar bad reasons that poets or sometimes successful. I don't think any of that is what's quite happening with Lamon. I think there is something different. So of all of these reviews and articles and essays and interviews I read, one or two of them, I think David Ulin for the Los Angeles Times, I think his was really the only standard issue bad faith laudatory poetry review. He was really mailing it in on this one. Here's the first paragraph of his piece. Ada Limon opens her 6th book of verse. He's got to say verse, I guess, because he knows he's going to be saying poetry a lot and he wants to vary the diction. Ada Limon opens her 6th book of verse, The Hurting Kind, with an epigraph from the Argentine poet Alejandra Pizarnik. And this is Pizarnik's, this is the epigraph. Though it's late, though it's night, and you are not able, sing as if nothing were wrong. Nothing is wrong. It's a striking set of lines, especially in the current moment, when reality itself appears to have slipped the rails, the lingering effects of the pandemic, the fallout from the January 6th insurrection, the draft decision that may overturn Roe versus Wade. It seems impossible to imagine that we will ever know anything other than upheaval or worse. At the same time, what other choice do we have but to live? This is absurd writing. I mean, first of all, if there's anything striking about that epigraph, it's its resemblance to Susanna Clark and Richard Lee's much paraphrased 1987 song, Come From the Heart, which goes, you've got to sing like you don't need the money, love like you'll never get hurt, you've got to dance like nobody's watching, it's got to come from the heart if you want it to work. Right? That's what the epigraph reminds one of. And then he just has, it's like he has this checklist of important current events that he feels he needs to shoehorn into this piece. At the same time, what other choice do we have but to live? Meaningless rhetorical question. He then goes on to praise the poems mostly by insisting that the language, it's all about the language. The language is great. He's only able to identify one specific example of the language actually having any quality whatsoever, and it's from the line, enough of the pointing to the world, comma, weary and desperate, and desperate falls in the next line. So the lines are, enough of the pointing to the world, weary and desperate. And Ulin's assessment is, could there be a better piece of wordplay than world, comma, weary? And yeah, man, there could be lots. Like try any poem written by Emily Dickinson or John Donne or Harriet Mullen or one of my personal favorites, W.C. Fields, who quipped, after 2 days in the hospital, I took a turn for the nurse. That's a better piece of wordplay than world, comma, weary, which is fine. But world weary is a compound word. That's how compounds get made, by putting together two words. All she does is break them apart again. But I do think when it comes to praise for The Hurting Kind, for Ada Limon's poems, I think that Ulin's half-hearted paint-by-numbers review is the exception. And in the rest of these articles, or at least many of them, the breathless rhetoric, the personal divulgences, and the sort of pseudo-philosophical self-helpy bent that many of them display all suggest something other than the usual denial-infused poetry review copy pasta. What it suggests to me is that the people writing these reviews genuinely like Ada Limon's poetry. So this is from Nicole Chung's piece in The Atlantic. All right, so this is Nicole Chung. She, meaning Ada Limon, she is one of my all-time favorite writers. This is what a few of them make the point that she is beloved as a writer, even outside the category of poetry, or even by people who don't like poetry, especially. So this is back to Nicole Chung. She is one of my all-time favorite writers, someone whose work I return to again and again for solace, inspiration, and truth. My copies of The Carrying and Bright Dead Things are now so dog-eared that I could never loan them out to anyone. That's something, right? This is, I think I can't remember if it was The Carrying or Bright Dead Things. One of her recent books sold 40,000 copies, which isn't so extraordinary if you're comparing it to hit fiction or nonfiction titles. But in poetry, that's astounding. I mean, amazing. The title of one of the New York Times pieces was Ada Limon makes a living by writing poems, which she seems to. I mean, her husband has a job, but she seems to, that's really her main income, that and her podcast, which I guess she gets donations from. She inherited it from Tracy K. Smith. Here is Juvika Verma for NPR. She says, above all, the hurting kind asks for our attention to stay tender, to know that the world is here to both guide us and lead us astray. Toward the end of the long poem, Limon writes, I will not stop this reporting of attachments. There is evidence everywhere. So don't stop looking. This is Juvika Verma talking to us. This is like the end of Ode to Grishnarin. Like the quotation marks end, the quotation marks close, and then Verma turns to us, having been inspired by Ada Limon, to say, so don't stop looking. Just be open to what you may find, and know the world is watching you too. This is in Chung's article. It's not. She doesn't give advice in the same way as Verma, but she does quote. She cites Limon's in conversation. She cites Limon in conversation. She says she shared some of the most generous and insightful writing advice I've ever heard. Think about this category: the most generous and insightful writing advice I've ever heard. So think about all the people who have written about writing: Aristotle, Horace, John Gardner, John Hollander, Derek Walcott, Philip Sidney. Think about all the people who've written on writing. This is some of the most generous and insightful writing advice I've ever heard. This is from Limon in conversation. Remember not to get too caught up in the idea that everything's been written or said or explored before. Give yourself permission to explore it for yourself. You are a unique human being put on this planet in this moment, and that can be enough. So what seems clear in both of these cases is that the writers of these pieces are really moved by Limon's poems, and moved not just as readers, but as human beings, as hopeful agents of meaning in the world. It has a very. They talk about her and they cite her and imitate her the way one might with a particularly effective preacher or guru. Here is maybe the most ecstatic of the pieces. This is Sarah Franklin again in LitHub. She says, for years now, I've kept Limon's books of poems on my bedside table, where I revisit them after I finally get my young twins to sleep, and I'm feeling empty and used up. When I need tender love or a good cry, when I need a nudge to bring my body into the outdoors, to walk the birds, to walk the dog, or get into the garden where Limon likes, as I do, to lose herself in work and wonder. In the early days of pandemic shutdown, with the world taut with anxiety and my marriage teetering on the edge of collapse, I reread The Carrying and Bright Dead Things cover to cover, night after night, refracting the cost of continuing to stay and fight or throwing in the towel through the prism of Limon's words. Limon does not come at truth with the slant of Dickinson. She is, rather, more inclined toward a direct punch to the gut. Somehow, I still experience her poems as soft. This is really personal writing. Right? I don't think this is bullshit. I think this is totally genuine, and it's powerful and it's moving. Franklin writes about Limon's poetry helping get her through some really difficult periods in her own life. She also, though, writes about the experience of talking to Limon even over Zoom, the way you might expect someone to talk about meeting a long lost love of some kind. I mean, it's so. This is, some of this. I mean, this is really Franklin's most evocative writing in the whole article. Surrounded by houseplants and books in her home office, Limon lit up the screen, her gaze open and inquisitive, her voice velvety in its inflections, her dark hair cascaded down past her collarbone onto the soft peach of her blouse. I found myself wishing desperately. Listen, all right, I'm going to start that sentence again. I found myself wishing desperately we were in space together, wondering what it would be like to feel the presence of a poet who writes, "The body is so body." Those are the lines that she's profoundly moved by. The body is so body. You might, this is back to Sarah Franklin, you might call Lamon something of a phenomenological poet. Much of what she brings to her poems, right? Heidegger, Husserl, Lamon. You might call Lamon something of a phenomenological poet. Much of what she brings to her poems is the physical experience of being in the world. And I told her it felt like something vital was missing, meeting her this way. I guess this way being by Zoom. So, if there's anything, I'm going to be talking with Alice about poetry manifestos, and she responded to the challenge. She responded to the topic by writing her own manifesto. Now I feel obliged to write something, which terrifies me. But if there's anything that would be at the heart of a manifesto about poetry, I'd write that you should enjoy it. You should be reading it because you enjoy it. You should write what you would enjoy. Enjoyment should be there at the center. And so this is, I don't want to tease these journalists too much because they enjoy her poetry. They really sincerely do, and they're writing about it with a passion. And I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad that these poems have helped them. I'm glad that Lamon is able to make a living with her poetry. She, unlike a lot of other poetry world stars, she seems, by all accounts, to be genuinely a really nice person. She's also, and I hesitate to say this because I don't think that it's central necessarily to her appeal, but it is maybe hard to overlook the fact that she is very beautiful and very stylish, but in a kind of a reasonable, approachable way, right? She doesn't look like an Instagram model, but she is but there is something, it's clear from Franklin's writing that there is something about her self as presented aesthetically that at least enhances the appeal of her poems. The thing that confused me when I read this writing, because again, I don't think this is the usual poetry review tap dance. I think this is sincere appreciation. But then what baffled me was that almost everything Lamon said in the interviews and almost all of the lines that these journalists quoted, presumably the best of her poems, they were all facile, mawkish, and prosaic. Here are some of Franklin's favorite lines. "We've come this far, survived this much. What would happen if we decided to survive more? To love harder." And then, "Some days I can see the point in growing something, even if it's just to say I cared enough." And then, "But right now, all I want is a story about human kindness." So these are the lines that are helping some of these, again, very sincere journalists through their dark nights of the soul. One of the New York Times pieces was a poem of Lamon's accompanied by a very complimentary introduction by Victoria Cheng, who edits poems for the New York Times Book Review. And Victoria Cheng's opening and the beginning of that little micro essay that Cheng wrote helped me think about Lamon's poems maybe in a slightly different way. So she says, "I can always rely on an Ada Limon poem to give me hope, but Lamon's poems don't give us the kind of facile hallmark hope. Rather, her hope is hard-earned, even laced with grief or unhappiness." The back end of that sentence, I don't think, tells us a whole lot about hope being hard-earned or laced with grief or unhappiness. That's truly any hope that's not childish. Even Hallmark cards express bittersweet sentiments. That's sort of their whole shtick. So I don't know that hope, it would be, it's hard to find any expression of hope that's not truly fundamentally childish, like the hope for Christmas Day. It's hard to find any hope that's not laced with grief or unhappiness. But what Cheng says, I think, gives a little bit of the game away. Well, I don't want to say gives the game away because I don't think it's a game, but she I think tips the emotional hand of a lot of these writers when she says this is not facile Hallmark hope. And I think that's right. I don't think these are Hallmark cards. I think they're different than Hallmark cards. But I do think that there is maybe a relationship to that kind of writing. So the phrase that came to mind, so in 2011, Manohla Dargis wrote a review of Bridesmaids. And she reviewed it positively, and she referred offhand to Jon Hamm, the actor who famously made his big break as the star of Mad Men. He is still almost synonymous with Don Draper as a figure and a name. She called him the thinking woman's brute. And I think that was quite an apt phrase, right? Because Jon Hamm is not Chris Hemmings, right? He's very good looking, but he's in more of an Ada Limon way, right? A little older than your average 25-year-old model, a little more weathered, but still extremely stylish and warm and inviting. And yet there is something about him that he has a very non-Ada Limon quality, which is a slight coarseness or hardness that is really, I think, mostly just aura left over from Don Draper, this haunted patriarch of the 1960s. I don't think Ada Limon is a thinking woman's Hallmark card, but I do think she might be a thinking woman's version of something else. So for my sins, after reading all of these articles and reviews, I read The Hurting Kind and was not blown away. I thought it was roughly what I expected it to be. I don't think she's a bad poet. Nothing really caught my attention or moved me. I mean, probably the best poem, just because it's sort of funny in a kind of an anti-poetry way, is the last one, The End of Poetry, where most of the poem is just a list of common tropes of poetry, many of which I was certainly guilty of employing in both of my collections. But most of The Hurting Kind was exactly the kind of poems that were quoted throughout all of these essays. They had some precise descriptions of nature, though usually in a kind of a suburban domestic context, the nature of the backyard, kind of, even if the backyard is in Lexington, Kentucky, rather than New York City. I guess there aren't backyards in New York City, really. But these were not, they didn't have much music to them. They didn't have much wit or irony to them. They were seldom surprising or funny or, really wrenching. They did, however, have a very consistently uplifting quality. There was a lot of self-affirmation and affirmation of others. There was a lot of some of the reviewers talked about her as being feminist. I am not an expert on precisely what that means, but there was certainly a lot of talk about women loving themselves and taking themselves seriously and celebrating themselves, all of which is to the good. But it had the quality, I think, of it felt a little bit like the diary of a self-help guru. And it occurred to me that there is another poet who reminds me a great deal of Ada Limon. I think Limon is the better poet, but I think the difference is actually small. I think the difference is substantial, but is a difference of degree rather than kind. I don't think Ada Limon is the thinking woman's Hallmark card. I do think she might be the thinking woman's Rupi Kaur. And just to test this thesis, I put together a list of some lines from Rupi Kaur paired with lines from Ada Limon. And as I was copy-pasting them and compiling them, I confess that there were moments when I forgot who had written which. I do think, again, I think Lamon is the better poet. I think she grounds her poems with imagery, specific imagery, a lot more often than Kaur does. But I think in sentiment and style, they are not so different. So I'll just read a few examples and you can decide for yourself. But this is Rupi Kaur. I don't know what living a balanced life feels like. When I am sad, I don't cry. I pour. And here's Ada Limon. To say I weep is untrue. Weep is too musical a word. I heave into the soil. I had to reread that line when I first came across it because at least growing up, heave was a synonym for vomit. I don't think that's what she means. So here's Rupi Kaur. I want sunspots as souvenirs for the beaches we laid on. I want to look like I was never afraid to let the world take me by the hand and show me what it's made of. And here's Ada Limon. I want them to go on kissing without fear. I want to watch them and not feel so abandoned by hands. Come home. Everything is begging you. Here's Rupi Kaur. Think of those flowers you plant in the garden each year. They will teach you that people too must wilt, fall, root, rise in order to bloom. And here's Ada Limon. I am trying to kill the fig buttercup, the way I'm supposed to according to the government website. But right now there's a bee on it. Yellow on yellow. Two bright things radiating life. I need them both to go on living. Here's Rupi Kaur. Sometimes the apology never comes when it is wanted. And when it comes, it is neither wanted nor needed. And here's Ada Limon. And because I cannot apologize to the tree, to my own self I say, I am sorry. I am sorry that I have been so reckless with your life. Here's Rupi Kaur. You don't see the person they are, you see the person they have the potential to be. You give and give till they have taken everything out of you and leave you empty. And here's Ada Limon. Could you refuse me if I asked you to point again at the horizon, to tell me something was worth waiting for? Here's Rupi Kaur. The irony of loneliness is we all feel it at the same time. Here's Ada Limon. Love ends, but what if it doesn't? Kaur, we have been dying since we got here and forgot to enjoy the view. Limon, haven't we learned by now that just because something is bound to break doesn't mean we shouldn't shiver when it breaks? Kaur, my voice is her father's words and mother's accent. What is the matter if my mouth carries two worlds? Limon, and so I have two brains now, two entirely different brains, the one that always misses where I'm not, and the one that is so relieved to finally be home. Kaur, from now on I will say things like, you are resilient, or you are extraordinary. Limon, it makes me want to give all my loves the adjectives they deserve. You are resplendent. You are radiant. You are sublime. Kaur, despite knowing they won't be here for long, they still choose to live their brightest lives. Sunflowers. Limon, if I had known, would I have still made mistake after mistake until I had only the trunk of me left, stripped and nearly bare of leaves? That image you will recognize from The Giving Tree. Here's Rupi Kaur. All this means nothing. This page where you're sitting, your degree, your job, the money, nothing even matters except love and human connection. Who loved and how deeply? And here's Ada Limon. I didn't know then that it wasn't even love that I was interested in, but my own suffering. I thought suffering kept things interesting. How funny that I called it love, and the whole time, it was pain. So I don't want just to make fun of Ada Limon. As I said before, I think she seems like a truly lovely person. She has genuine fans who genuinely like her poems and buy books of them and support her, and great. I certainly cannot knock that. I guess if I have a criticism, it's just that I think plenty of the same people who celebrate Lamone's poetry might dismiss Rupi Kaur's poetry. Now, I'm not a huge fan of either, but I do think they are doing more or less the same thing. I think the biggest difference, I think Lamone is probably a better writer. I think Lamone is a better writer. I think she has slightly more range than Kaur. But I also think she's older, right? She has a lot more experience than Kaur. And she is writing for a certain audience. She's writing for people who are book readers, not necessarily people who are poetry readers, but people who are book readers. And I think they appreciate the slight refinement of her writing, the added physical detail, the precise diction. In most cases, she misuses both enormity and nonplussed, but then again, most book reading people misuse those words, so no big deal. I just think that that there is, I think we could use slightly less overheated language in talking about Ada Limon and just acknowledge that she writes feel-good self-affirmations that people that do their job and get very nice people through very hard times. I just don't think she is a brilliant immortal poet. I'll tell you what, though, in preparing this segment, I did start to experience a little bit of self-doubt, not about my verdict on Ada Limon, but really about my verdict on my own poetry, really. I mean, so I think, as I've mentioned before, I write a poem a week with a couple of ladies that I met through a poetry anthology. We meet on Zoom, we share a prompt, and then we spend 45 minutes or so banging out a draft of something, and we read it to each other, and then we sign off. Or I sign off, and they keep talking. But I worry that what I'm doing may be getting a little facile, maybe getting a little easy. I tend to be a big believer in clarity. Not necessarily what people call accessibility, because that can end up meaning a lot of things, including dumbing down. But I think there is really something to be said for clarity. And while I don't have the same ultimately optimistic vision of the universe that Ada Limon seems to have, I wonder how much deeper or more sophisticated my own poems might be. And right now I don't totally know. I do think I want to devote a segment in the future to A.E. Stallings. A.E. Stallings, Alicia Stallings is her given name. She really is one of my very, very favorite poets. I mean, I have, I think, like many formal poets, especially male and female, my age or hereabouts, I've been a little bit in love with her since high school when my mentor gave me her first book. But I think that, so when I have spoken to people about her poems and they have not been receptive, the criticism tends to be that her work is too simple. It's too easy, both in sentiment and in structure. And while I disagree, I think it might be useful to kind of break down why. Certainly I'm more hopeful about my ability to do that with her poems than with my own. So I do want to maybe get back to that at some point. But for now, I'll just close with, let's just do a reading of Ada Limon's last poem in this book, called The End of Poetry. And here I think, it ends a little sentimentally in a kind of a typical Ada Limon fashion, but as a list of shit she's tired of seeing in poems, let he who has never sinned cast the first stone. So here's the end of poetry. Enough of osseous and chickadee and sunflower and snowshoes, maple and seeds, samara and shoot. Enough chiaroscuro. Enough of thus and prophecy, and the stoic farmer, and faith, and our Father, and 'tis of thee. Enough of bosom and bud, skin and God, not forgetting, and star bodies, and frozen birds. Enough of the will to go on, and not go on, or how a certain light does a certain thing. Enough of the kneeling, and the rising, and the looking inward, and the looking up. Enough of the gun, the drama, and the acquaintance's suicide, the long-lost letter on the dresser, enough of the longing and the ego and the obliteration of ego, enough of the mother and the child and the father and the child, and enough of the pointing to the world, weary and desperate, enough of the brutal and the border, enough of can you see me, can you hear me, enough I am human, enough I am alone and I am desperate, enough of the animal saving me, enough of the high water, enough sorrow, enough of the air and its ease. I am asking you to touch me. So I rather like that one. I don't, it's, it has a little bit of that, saving up the invocation of the you till the last line in order to provoke a double take. But it's, again, it's hard to argue with her moratorium. All right, that is this week's show. Thank you so much for listening. You can reach me as always at sleerickets@gmail.com or on Twitter at sleerickets. I'm getting kind of tired of, there are a few of us doing it, but everybody's been slacking off a little bit. And I just find it really boring. I just find Twitter really boring. And as I talk about in The Secret Show a little bit, I've already gotten in a small amount of trouble for it. So I don't know. I'm thinking of deactivating it just unless there seems to be like a good reason to keep it going. I have a whole lot more fun talking to y'all this way than through Twitter. In any case, what I am certainly planning to go ahead with is The Secret Show. So please, if you have not yet, go to sleerickets.substack.com and sign up to listen to a bunch more dumb gossipy bullshit on there. sleerickets.substack.com. I will have a link in the show notes. And as a reward for your patience, here is a preview of the third episode of The Secret Show. 3 episodes, as I said, are up there now. You can listen to them today along with the pulled 55th episode. Here is that preview right now. At some point later on, I could definitely be a very nerdy guy taking a drawing class.
I was going to say painter, right?
Yeah,
you could
not
right.
painting. Painting is beyond me, especially with color. I don't see color well.
Oh, that's right. You don't see color.
Yeah, but I always liked drawing a little bit, and I was okay at it as a kid, and so I would like to do a little more of that at some point. And maybe I would end up paying for 6 sessions and going to 4. I don't know.
Is it obnoxious to me to think of drawing, especially at the level you're discussing, as more like craft or skill based? Of course, writing is craft based, but I could see 6 sessions after going to a drawing class, you being able to draw an apple that sort of looks like an apple a little bit better.
Yeah,
where it feels like you could see results. Whereas I can't imagine anyone. I mean, not that you're not a spectacular teacher of literary arts, but I bet it's difficult to see results at the end of this. Are people looking to publish? Are they looking to show others maybe, and they just want pay a few $100 and get edited by someone who knows stuff?
So yeah, maybe. I mean, I wonder about if it's not a matter of the bigness of the skill though, because you're right. Drawing an apple feels like a discrete enough thing that if you went and practiced drawing still life for 6 weeks,
and you're not going to do it on your own, so you're forced to show up and try to draw the apple, and someone's you shade there.
Yeah, right. and you've listened to the teacher and you did it a little bit on your own during the week, then you would think that after 6 weeks you probably would be a little better at it. I think that would be true if I were teaching a course in writing verse, writing in meter and rhyme,
right?
And for 14 lines at a time, and we did it, and we crunched it,
and you end with a couplet, and
and I think I would get people noticeably better at that over the course of 6 weeks. I think writing a short story is such a big amorphous task that probably you don't see. I think my hope is that the difference that you might get from honestly, taking John Irwin's classes, because he was such a weird, boring teacher in person, but then so many weird little things he said have come back to me over the years and have ended up feeling truer over time.
When I took classes from John Irwin, who had some sort of heart attack and lay on the ice for a long time and then died.
He had a terrible fall. He died later. It took him.
It's a dramatic incident from what I have been told that involved lying on the ice for long.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he fell on the ice. Yeah.
There's nothing funny about that. I don't know why I'm laughing.
Good
the poor
zinger.
The poor old man. Just there's no story. He just fell on the ice and no one was around to help.
Yeah.
It's not. There's nothing amusing about an elderly man falling on the ice, and nobody being around to help.
Yeah.
I thought he was one of the worst teachers I've ever had of anything. He so looked down upon us as students.
Yeah.
But we were so much better at being students than he was at being a teacher that it was offensive. It was doubly offensive. So we were graduate students at this point, assigned like not much reading, and he would give us like 6 questions, like reading quizzes. We were like in our 20s and 30s, and he was giving us reading quizzes. Like, what is the girlfriend's name in, this story by Fitzgerald? Who remembers characters' names anyway? So it's like not only was it insulting, but it meant we were reading as though we were 6th graders, like circling the names because you want to be yelled at by this old washed up man who would get hurt and lie on the ice. And he hated us and he hated being there. And the only thing he liked was he went on these whimsical journeys in his own mind about, who here has piloted a helicopter, like we know the answer to that. None of us have piloted a helicopter, and he would talk to us about how the definition of a real man is to pilot a helicopter. And he wasn't a good teacher.
Yeah, in his defense, he did, as far as being watched up, he did a few years after we graduated publish the definitive book on Hart Crane, which he'd been working on for something 30 years.
I'm sure he had other talents.
Yeah. One more time to hear the rest of that conversation, as well as 2 other whole new episodes and many more to come, go to sleerickets.substack.com and sign up now. Use the annual fee version because it's cheaper. It's a lot cheaper. So unless you're rich, in which case, sign up to be Motherfucker of the Arts and give me extra money. Thank you so much. And with any luck, I will be speaking to you all again very soon. Until then.